Breaking this morning on the Weather Channel. We now have our first hurricane of the Atlantic Basin season, Hurricane Hanna. 8 storms, our first hurricane. Landfall projected this afternoon in South Texas around Baffin Bay. Good morning, I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, 9 a.m. on the East Coast here in Port Aransas, Texas. It is 8 a.m. Central on a late July Saturday, and we've already had 8 storms. What a season so far. And look at the water. High tide was 30 minutes ago, but the water's going to have a tough time going out. Yesterday, we were way out there at high tide. In fact, I want to show you the Charles Peak drone video to put this in perspective of how much of the beach is underwater. In fact, it's all underwater when the water kind of surges up here. But look at the video from yesterday from above. People out on the beach with their pop-up tents enjoying this 86-degree water and a sunny hot day in the upper 90s, and the heat index is 110. Today, forget about the beach. The rip currents, the surge warning is up above normally higher ground as much as 4 or 5 feet, although we have one factor in our favor. High tide is now, low tide is 2:30 this afternoon, so that's going to take a little edge off the top of that. Here comes another push of water. What we have here, these huge dunes in Port Aransas, and these are phenomenal. Where I'm from on the Maryland-Delaware coast, if we had dunes this high, very protective, a strong protective measure from the force of the Gulf and tropical systems. But the water does come right up here in these walkways up to the buildings, right up to the base of the steps to the Port Aransas Beach Lodge. And then it goes right back out. So we're going to lose some sand. You can see we've seen some of the erosion on some of the bottom of the dune, but by far these dunes are going to be fine. The other story is the rainfall. Right now we've had about 4/10 of an inch of rain at nearby Mustang Airport. Peak gusts, I last checked, 37 miles an hour. Now on the radar you can see the rain bands wrapping around the center. These are more the outer rain bands hitting the coastal bend. This area, Corpus, down towards the Baffin Bay area. It's the bands right around the center of Hanna. As it comes on shore to our south, it's moving west. We'll get into some of those northwest bands. And then we have the issue of potential quick spin-ups, because that's the right front quadrant. Always a concern when we have a landfalling tropical system that we could have some brief tornadoes. We had one warning earlier, well north and west and inland, but now we're just going to wait and see if the Storm Prediction Center puts out a tornado watch. So here it is, the first hurricane of the season, Hanna, coming on shore this afternoon. Winds right now of 75 miles an hour. We'll see if it strengthens another little bit before it makes landfall. And then the inland impacts, flash flood watches up for this whole area through tomorrow. The heaviest rain by far will be in South Texas, where we could get up to 1 foot of rain, and there could be some significant flooding in those areas, including Brownsville, McAllen, and Harlingen. Dr. Postel back in the studio. Dr. Postel, first hurricane of the season. Not only this, we've got Gonzalo, we've got Douglas heading towards the islands of Hawaii, and we're also watching 92L, which the Hurricane Center now, I believe, has a 60% chance of developing. So all of a sudden, we've kind of just turned everything on in the tropics, and this, our first significant impact of the season.
Mike, it does seem like the window is open for tropical opportunity across the this part of the world, and we've got one hurricane closing in on the Texas Gulf Coast. If you're just tuning in,
first hurricane, let's go north of where I am, and my colleague Mike Seidel has been there as well. And Mike, talk about the conditions you're seeing there, because you had a high tide a little bit earlier than we're seeing high tide here in North Padre.
Indeed, Paul, our high tide was 7:34 about an hour and a half ago, and we've seen very little evidence that the tide has gone out because Hanna's making its approach, and we're getting that push from Hanna. So the tide is trying to go out, but it's fighting the force of the push or the surge of water on shore. We just had a surge go all the way up to the beach lodge again, so we're not seeing any evacuation of the water on a permanent basis. Here comes some more water. Water temp 86 degrees, very, very warm. I want to show you first what it looked like yesterday at high tide, Charles Peak with the drone up, and look at the beach from above. Nice wide beach. Folks out with their pop-up tents until the wind came in with an outflow, and that took one down the beach and everybody else put theirs down. But you sense of how much beach is covered. But let me give you a disclaimer. This is a very flat beach. There's little, if any, elevation change until you get to the dunes behind me. So with that in mind, you don't need a lot of surge increase in the tide to get the water over the whole beach. So that's what's going on right now. We're also seeing things floating down the beach. Right here, just behind me, about 25 yards, is where the trash cans and porta potties were. They're way, way down there now. They've moved about 75 yards down the beach. Just the water. We talk about water and floating cars. Doesn't take much. Doesn't take much for these objects out here on the beach at this point. The other concern would be the threat for severe weather. When those stronger rain bands come in, right now we're in a lull, we're just getting some light rain and gusts to close to 40. When those stronger rain bands come in, we're going to be in the right front quadrant. That is a concern. We may get some spin-ups. We had one earlier tornado warning based on Doppler radar well north or west of us inland, but we could have additional tornado warnings. Tornadoes with a system like this tend to be quick, but they can do damage. They tend to be EF0s or EF1s, so we'll watch that and see if the Storm Prediction Center puts out a tornado watch. Rainfall, too, especially as Paul mentioned down in the Rio Grande Valley. Up here, we're forecasting several inches so far. We've had about a half an inch of rain. But Dr. Postel, or let's go back to Paul Goodloe down in North Padre and Corpus. Paul, I checked your Corpus Christi ob recently. I know you're closer to the Naval Air Station, but the airport itself had not gusted to 40 yet. But those higher gusts should come in there this afternoon as you get those bands associated with the center that goes into your south.
Yeah, certainly. That's where the heavier rain is, too, looking at the rain. Where my colleague Mike Seidel has been. And Mike, talk about the waves there. What type of size waves are you seeing kind of breaking there in the Port Aransas area?
Paul, they're breaking so far out it's hard to tell. I'd estimate 8 to 10 footers, even higher off the coastal waters. But the water is riding all the way up the beach. Keep in mind the beach here is fairly level, so it doesn't take much of a rise, a surge, to cover the beach. It looks worse than it does once the tide goes out and the surge backs off. We'll see a lot different picture. In fact, we'll show you what it looked like yesterday afternoon, late yesterday afternoon. Charles Peak had his drone up, and look how wide the beach is. So you get a sense of what it typically is on a day without a hurricane approaching the coast. Our first hurricane of the season here in late July, and that's going to come in south of us down around Baffin Bay. So the wind right now is north-northeast, sustained 25 to 30. We've had gusts up around 40, but it's those squalls off the coast. You can see the bright bands in the radar on the northwest quadrant. They're going to come rotating in here towards the coastal bend, put Port Aransas, Rockport, down to Corpus where Paul is, and that is where we're going to have the strongest winds and the heaviest rainfall. So, Dr. Postel, I think here we could gust 50, 60 miles an hour. Certainly not the gusts they're going to get where the center comes on shore. You've got more analysis on Hanna, and the other threat for millions will be inland and the heavy rainfall totals of double digits.
Yes, rainfall will be.
Now let's get more of the coastal impacts of Hanna and head up the island here to Port Aransas, where Mike Seidel is and has been all morning. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Paul. We're just north of you here on Mustang Island. We've gusted over 40 miles an hour, but what we're watching now is the radar, and this is the band we've been watching all morning. The outer bands have come through. We've had gusts around 40. We've had about a half an inch of rain, but you can see how close it is now till we get those stronger bands. The squally weather with wind gusts 50 or 60 miles an hour and that horizontal pelting rainfall. We've seen a noticeable increase certainly in the surf since yesterday when we were here. In fact, the whole beach was wide open yesterday at high tide. Charles Peak was up with his drone, and you get a sense of how much beach has been covered up. Now, I disclaimer this with the fact that the beach is level, fairly level here. There's no rise, so it doesn't take much water rise or surge to cover the whole beach, and it's all the way up into these breaks in these dunes at these hotels. This is the Port Aransas Beach Lodge. They're up there safely elevated. They didn't have any major issues with water with Harvey, and they won't this time. Although the water has gone all the way up to the bottom of their building there, they're in good shape from the surge perspective. Now, as far as the wind gusts, we could have some minor wind damage, but basically power outages. We could have some scattered power outages in the area. The water has been trying to go out. Low tide was about 2.5 hours ago. It's a little after 10 Central, but it's still pushing all the way up. In fact, the water's really higher now than it was at high tide at 7:34 this morning. That's telling you what's going on. Hanna intensifying, coming closer to the coast, and we're on the side where the wind comes around on the north side and is an onshore flow, not an offshore flow. So that's piling the water up, and as a result, this water is going nowhere as far as going out. Now, low tide officially is about 2:30 this afternoon, and that will help us at least a little bit. At least we're not getting landfall at high tide, although with the fact that the forward speed has slowed down, that means landfall is going to be later on this afternoon, and our next high tide is about 7:30 or 8 o'clock tonight. So getting buffeted by gusty winds, waiting for those squalls to come in, Dr. Postel, where we really get the worst of Hanna here in the Port Aransas area in Nueces County. Let's go back down to North Padre, just off the coast, across the bridge from Corpus. And Paul, I heard you mention wind gusts 47 miles an hour. Certainly, you're going to do better than that as we get into the next 4, 5, 6 hours.
We definitely are, and I'm constantly turning around to check it. Let's take you up the coast to Mike Seidel. He's in Port Aransas, also dealing with a pretty agitated Gulf of Mexico this morning. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Paul, once again in Port Aransas, where the water has been over the beach all morning. It's a level beach, but still you get a sense of how rough that surf is as Hanna makes its approach and makes landfall later today. Look down the beach. Here comes another push of water. 89 degrees. Yes, that's your water temp. It doesn't get much warmer than that unless you get in a hot tub. 89. We've had certainly that onshore flow bring in some of the warmer water on the surface. I would assume why it's jumped up. It was 86 a few days ago. But look at the angry Gulf of Mexico as far as the eye can see. It is all churned up. The water, it's not very deep. You can go out about 100 yards. That's the beach where we were yesterday, and now the water is coming on in. So we're getting some beach erosion. I'm standing right here on the edge of this dune, and we've lost some of the dune right here and across the way. So we're getting a little bit of a cut here in the dune here in Port Aransas. The winds so far have gusted about 45 miles an hour. But what we've seen is the trash cans and porta potties, which were not taken off the beach. Well, one set of them have just floated up. They were just floated up right in towards the Beach Lodge restaurant, and everybody out on the deck eating breakfast, they were out here. They were going, oh my gosh, here they come. There's also a trash can hidden in there, and there's a pop-up tent which was ripped to shreds by the wind. So that's really been the worst of the impacts as far as physical. We are losing some sand too, and we're going to watch the worst of the wind, gust over 60 miles an hour, as those squalls around the center come on shore here in Port Aransas and Nueces County through the late morning and through this afternoon. We've got certainly continuing coverage on this. Gonzalo in the Caribbean, also Hurricane Douglas heading for the Hawaiian Islands, and a very feisty tropical wave concerns in a couple of weeks, maybe for the U.S. Stay with the Weather Channel coverage all day. Good morning, I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel. Welcome back. We appreciate you watching our continuing coverage of Hurricane Hanna, the first hurricane of the Atlantic season and the first one to make landfall. It will make landfall later on today, south of here, down around Baffin Bay. We're going to be on the north side of the North Fringe. Already we've seen the entire beach, and this has been going on since, oh gosh, the pre-dawn hours of this morning here in Port Aransas. The whole beach underwater. Now it is a level beach, so there's not much elevation. But look at the Gulf of Mexico. Boy, it's all churned up as far as the eye can see. The wind is blowing kind of parallel to the beach here, north-northeast. We've been gusting just up over 40 miles an hour, even with a band that's come in. Not very impressive, but there's another set of heavier rain bands that's going to get in here in the next few hours. That's where we may get the gusts 50 to 60 miles an hour. So the water is trying to go out. We had low tide, or rather high tide, at 7:34 this morning. So that is, about 3.5 hours ago. So we're still seeing the water kind of go up. What we've also seen, the trash cans and the porta potties, which were not removed from the beach, they have gone in every direction. Most of them have gone south towards Corpus, but we've got a couple, one set here along with the trash can that was pushed by the water and the surge all the way up towards the restaurant here at the Port Aransas Beach Lodge. So our concern now on the beaches, the rip currents. There has been some erosion of these big dunes, but you can see these are massive beach dunes, about as big as they ever get, as I've ever seen on the East Coast, and let alone down here on the Gulf Coast of Texas. So we've lost a little bit of sand, and we're concerned with potentially a little bit of severe weather this afternoon. We could get some spin-ups, some twisters, because they're going to be in the right front quadrant as the center moves on shore later on today. So Hanna really at the last minute winding up and just coming together. And I can tell you, Dr. Postel, I've covered about 75 tropical storms and hurricanes over 25 plus years, and this is the first time I've stood in water in the surf right like this, where the water temperature is 89 degrees. I've done 85, maybe 86, but 89, this is a new high for me. This is about as warm as the water gets here on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, Mike, and that has supplied Hanna with fuel to get as strong as the storm has.